12 men, barely 5'4", did in 5 hours what my entire Marine platoon couldn't do in 16 days. I'm 45 years old. For 14 years, I carried this silence like a stone because the truth felt like betraying the Corps. We had $5,000 thermal optics, airstrikes, and 90 kilos of muscle. They had curved knives and silence. I learned that night that the deadliest thing on a battlefield isn't a battery-powered laser. It's a man who smells like the dirt and moves like a shadow. Our technology wasn't our edge, it was our handicap. If you think lessons paid for in blood shouldn't be buried under official reports, stick around. Subscribe if you want the stories they don't put in the museums. And leave a mark below if you've ever had your pride shattered by a truth you weren't ready to see. It's been 14 years. 14. I've carried this silence like a stone in my gut. I never told my wife. Not my kids. Nobody. You don't go home to Cleveland and tell people that a dozen guys half your size did in 5 hours what your whole platoon couldn't do in 16 days. It feels like betraying the Corps just saying it. But I went to the Marine Museum recently. I saw the official history. It's all sanitized. It doesn't mention the smell of copper in those caves. It doesn't mention the terrifying, absolute silence of that night. The men who really knew? They're mostly gone. Captain Thorne, the British liaison, passed away last year. This is the first time I'm putting this on the record. It's a confession. My first time speaking publicly. Because this story, it's been eating me alive for over a decade. Stay with me here. You need to hear this. Because I have to ask, how did 16 days of American airstrikes fail where 12 men with knives succeeded? How does a man barely 5'4" decapitate a fortified enemy without waking the guy in the next bunk? And what happens to a Marine's psyche when he realizes his technology was actually his biggest handicap? I wasn't a boot. Multiple tours. ITB at Lejeune. I had the best training America could buy. I was arrogant, confident. I thought those Gurkhas were a joke. I'm going to show you how that arrogance crumbled, how those men humiliated everything I knew. If you want to see the moment my world broke, you've got to subscribe and follow. Stay until the end. I'll tell you about the cleaning station, about what was on those blades. Listen. It was 2010, August, Helmand Province. You ever been to Sangin? God, it's the end of the world. We were there for Operation Moshtarak, trying to hold the valley. My unit, 2-8, we had this objective, the Tooth. This nasty limestone ridge 3 clicks north of the Fob. The Taliban? They were dug in deep. Caves, trenches. We've been hitting them for 16 days straight. 16. We used everything. M777 howitzers, Hellfires from the Cobras, frontal assaults. Nothing worked. They just retreated into the limestone and waited. The heat. Christ. 44 degrees during the day. Bone dry. And the dust. This white moon dust that gets into everything. Your lungs, your rifle, your soul. We'd already lost 9 brothers, 9 KIA, 14 wounded. We were exhausted, beaten, but we still thought we were the toughest bastards on the planet. Because we had the tech. I remember the day they arrived. A Chinook came in low, kicking up that grit. And the smell, man, that's what hits you first. It wasn't just the diesel from the bird. It was this scent of baked earth, old sweat, and copper. Always that metallic tang of blood in the air in Sangin. You could taste it on your tongue. The sun was a physical blow to the back of your neck, suffocating. I was leaning against a Humvee, just watching. My gear felt like 100 pounds of useless plastic. But I was confident, arrogant. I looked at my men, big guys, 90 kilos of American muscle. We had the best optics, the best training. I figured whatever was on that helicopter was just filler, British leftovers. I didn't expect anything to change. I thought I knew how this war went. Pain, noise, more caskets. Before they landed, I'd heard the stories. The British liaison, Captain Thorne, he'd been talking them up for days, calling them the bravest of the brave. Legends, he said. Don't mistake their politeness for a lack of appetite, Staff Sergeant. I just laughed. I told Tex Miller, my saw gunner, appetite for what? Coconuts? We thought it was a joke. Colonial relics. I mean, come on. 12 guys? No drones? No air support? It sounded like some old-school fantasy. I checked my M4, felt the weight of my ACOG sight, and felt sorry for them. We were prepping for the briefing, thinking we'd have to babysit these boys. I remember walking toward the landing zone. The air was dead, no wind, just this eerie silence for a second, and I thought, yeah, they're gonna get slaughtered, just like we did. My certainties? They were already starting to rot. They stepped off that bird at 1400, right into a 44-degree heat wave that felt like a physical blow. 12 of them. 12 little men emerging from the harsh, blinding white dust like they'd finished a casual hike, not a combat insertion. I stood there, 90 kilos of American muscle, feeling like a giant. They were tiny, maybe 5'4" on a good day. Their uniforms were faded, almost gray from the moon dust, and their gear was minimalist. No heavy plates, no fancy lasers, just their rifles and those curved wooden handles peeking from their belts. And the smell. It wasn't the usual Marine scent of gun oil and energy drinks. It was earthy, like dried spices mixed with wood smoke and a deep, baked-in sweat. Watching them form up, silent and still, I felt embarrassed for them. I remember looking at Tex Miller and thinking, these boys are going to get absolutely chewed up by the limestone. I walked over, leaning against the warm metal of the Humvee, trying to look salty for the newcomers. I pointed a finger at the curved leather scabbard on the lead guy's belt. Havildar Sunil, I later learned. I let out a bitter, condescending laugh and said, "Hey, Havildar, did you boys bring those to help us clear the brush, or are you planning on opening some coconuts?" My guys, 34 hardened Marines, roared behind me. It was a good line, but Sunil didn't laugh. He didn't even flinch, and he looked me dead in the eye with a gaze that felt like cold steel and said, "The blade does not need a battery to find a throat, Staff Sergeant." Just that, 13 words. His voice was quiet, almost polite, but it had an edge that made my chest tighten. I forced another laugh, but the joke didn't feel funny anymore. I watched them prep their gear that evening. It violated every protocol I'd ever been taught. They weren't checking optics or syncing digital maps. They were sitting in a circle, stone-faced, running whetstones along those curved blades with a rhythmic, metallic shink that set my teeth on edge. No light discipline, no frantic radio checks, just 12 men sharpening steel in the dirt. I leaned over to Tex and whispered, "Look, they're treating a high-tech insurgency like a medieval turf war. It's pathetic." Tex just spat in the dust and nodded, but I noticed he wasn't laughing. Their fluid grace made our heavy, methodical movements look clunky. They weren't fighting the environment. They seemed part of it. My pride wouldn't let me admit a knife could beat a hellfire. But that was only the beginning. Because 3 days later I would discover just how wrong I was. The smell. I mentioned it before, right? That earthy, spice-heavy scent. I thought they were just unhygienic, tactical sloppiness. But then Sunil explained it. 3 days before a hit, they stop eating meat, no processed sugar, no American MREs, no scented soap. They purge their own chemical signature. He told me a Taliban sentry can smell a Marine's Ripid energy drink and beef jerky from 50 meters away in that dry air. 50 meters. We were walking neon signs to those guys. The Gurkhas? They wanted to smell like the dirt, like the goats, like nothing at all. I looked at my guys, smelling like gun oil and deodorant, and I felt exposed. I still thought it was overkill. "We're Marines," I told him. "We bring the noise." But Sunil just tapped his nose and whispered, "The nose hears the American before the ear does." It started to make sense. Then there was the way they moved. We'd go out with 34 men, aggressive, show of force, right? We wanted them to know we were coming, to intimidate them. We moved fast, 10 clicks a day, radios chirping, boots crunching on that moon dust. The Gurkhas? 12 men. That's it. They'd cover maybe 2 clicks in a night. 2. I thought they were lazy, scared of the dark. But they weren't moving to a destination. They were hunting. They didn't use radios. Not a peep. Hand signals and, I don't know, instinct. They didn't want to find the enemy. They wanted the enemy to never, ever know they existed until the blade was already through the windpipe. It was the complete opposite of everything I learned. We were a hammer, They were a shadow. You want them to run, Sunil said. We want them to sleep. That hit me hard. That's when the numbers started coming out. I saw a report later. British Army records. Top secret. I read a statistic that made me feel sick. 1 to 500. 1 Gurkha dead for every 500 enemy killed. 500. I thought it was a typo. Had to be, right? Our ratio in Sangin? 1 to 12. On a good week. We were bleeding for every inch of that valley. They were ghosts, taking a toll we couldn't imagine. It was a different philosophy. We believed in firepower, technology, and attrition. They believed in patience, precision, and cold steel. The blade does not need a battery, he'd said. I finally got it. We were fighting a modern war against an ancient enemy. But the Gurkhas? They were the ancient nightmare the enemy was actually afraid of. I didn't want to believe it. But everything changed on the night of the 15th. August 15th. Exactly midnight. The heat was finally dipping to 18 degrees, but I was sweating through my BDUs. Sunil and his 12 men stood up. No radio checks, no syncing digital maps. They just dissolved into the black. I was standing there in 40 kilos of the best armor America could buy, holding my $5,000 thermal optics, and I couldn't see them. Not even a heat bloom. They'd purged their scent, their sound, their existence. Tex Miller looked at me, his face pale in the green glow of his nods, and said, "They're gone, Sarge, just like that." And I gripped the cold metal of my M4 and said, "Keep your eyes on the ridge, they're still out there." I just watched that ridge, 3 clicks north. 16 days we'd been pounding it. Now, it was just a dark tooth against an ink-black sky. No wind, no movement, just this heavy, suffocating silence. It felt like the world was holding its breath. 2 o'clock. 2 hours of absolute, terrifying silence. Usually, war is a symphony of noise. You hear the thump-thump of mortars, the crackle of radios, the distant chatter of PKMs. But tonight, dead air. I kept checking my headset, whispering radio check into the void, only to get static. I stared through my optics until my eyes felt like they were bleeding. Nothing. No muzzle flashes, no Taliban sentries shouting, just empty darkness. Tex gripped his saw so hard his knuckles were white and said, "Sarge, I don't like this. It's too quiet. Something's wrong." I started to believe him. I thought the Gurkhas had walked into a trap and been erased. My training told me that if you aren't shooting, you aren't winning. I felt this cold, physical dread in my stomach, a weight that no amount of gym-built muscle could lift. We were the big dogs, but in that silence we felt like clunky, noisy children waiting for a ghost to scream. 5:10, first light. The Gurkhas walked back into the fob. They weren't tired, they were glistening. This dark, wet sheen all over their uniforms, not sweat. Sunil wiped a crimson rag across his kukri and said, "Position clear. 40 enemy neutralized. We are ready for breakfast." And I just stood there, my mouth dry as moon dust, and said, "You did it, without a single shot." I grabbed my recon team and ran to the ridge. We hit the first cave and the smell of copper hit me like a physical blow. Thick, sweet, rotten. 3 sentries were still sitting at their posts, rifles in their laps, but their heads, God, they'd been opened up with surgical precision. I looked at the ground. I looked for brass, for spent shells. Nothing. 40 men dead in 5 hours. No shots fired. My world, everything I believed about firepower, it died right there in that cave. I wasn't a warrior anymore. I was just a man with a useless toy. We got back to the fob around 06. I didn't say a word. Not a single word. How do you even start that conversation? I walked into the command center, boots caked in that thick white moon dust. Captain Thorne was there with our CO. They wanted the sit rep. I just stood there. My hands, they were shaking. Just a little. I looked at the CO and I said, "Sir, the ridge is clear. Every one of them. Dead." He just stared, like I'd lost my mind. "Harrison," he said, We dropped 4 Hellfires on that ridge. You're telling me 12 guys with knives finished it? I just nodded. I couldn't even look at my M4. It felt like a useless toy. A heavy, expensive, loud toy. Tex Miller was outside, retching. We all felt it. This deep, professional shame. I tried to tell them our noise was killing us. They didn't listen. It was over. I was a ghost. It's been 14 years now. 14 long years. And I still smell it. That copper. Every time I handle a kitchen knife or a pack of cold coins, it's back. Sangin. The caves. My wife, she thinks I'm just the quiet type. She has no idea. I see those 9 faces. My boys. My Marines. They died in those first 16 days because I was an arrogant son of a bitch. Because I believed muscle and technology were everything. If I'd just known, if I'd listened to Thorne earlier, maybe those guys would be home now, raising their kids. I went to the Marine Museum last month and saw the official display. It's all sanitized. Marines secured the ridge. No mention of the silence, no mention of the blades. That's why I'm finally talking. This truth is heavy to carry alone. I was the one who was unarmed that night. Every single day. How do you explain it? We had the data, we had the bodies, but the machine, it doesn't like to admit when it's wrong, especially not to a dozen men with wooden-handled knives. It's institutional pride. It's the weight of a doctrine built on noise and power since the 60s. Think about the numbers from every conflict that followed. Thousands of lives. Gone. Because we refused to be quiet. It took a whole decade of blood before the Tier 1 units finally started baking these low-signature truths into their DNA. But at what cost? How many caskets did we flag before we realized the loudest hammer isn't the best tool? I look at you, and I have to ask, where are you doing the same thing? Where are you ignoring evidence because your ego is too big? Are you choosing the loud, expensive failure over the quiet, difficult truth? How much will that pride cost you? Remember those 3 questions from the start? Let me give you the answers. First, the airstrikes failed because they were hitting limestone, but the Gurkhas were hitting the men. You can't bomb a ghost, and you can't defeat a man who is already behind you before you even wake up. Second, your psyche shatters. You realize your expensive gear is just heavy glass when the enemy is a shadow. You go from being the predator to feeling like the loudest, slowest prey in the valley. And third, they did it with silence. Pure, disciplined silence that turned a ridge into a graveyard in 4 hours. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to swallow your pride and admit you were completely wrong about something important? How did it feel? If you want more stories that the official history likes to bury, subscribe. 1 to 500. 14 years later, that number still wakes me up. Every single night. I was the one who was unarmed.